So we have this issue, since professionalism is a very serious topic here, and one that was treated with a lot of optimism and seriousness in our educational meeting. How do we develop professionalism and so forth, and how do we collaborate to do it? I think that something we're going to need in a lighter vein are philosophy jokes, jokes about philosophers. To show that we're a true profession, we'll need to have jokes about it. The problem is this: there are philosophical jokes, but only philosophers get them. That's the real, this is the challenge, okay? And then only on a good day. So everybody gets the lawyer jokes, everybody gets the rabbi jokes, everybody gets this, but nobody gets the philosopher jokes, and this is the challenge. There was an example of Morgan Besser's humor. There was this guy talking about the asymmetries in philosophy of language and philosophy of mathematics, where we have certain asymmetries. For example, two negatives make a positive in arithmetic. Whereas, and in grammar also, a double negation is an affirmation in most grammatical languages. Whereas this speaker said, two affirmations do not constitute a negation. Morgan Besser said, yeah. Yeah, so you look at this, the roaring of the world rolling in the aisles, says only philosophers would find this funny. You can try this, do this social experiment, try it on non-philosophers, and they just, this is our problem. So I have a couple more. Russell is my favorite. I already regaled one of you with this, but Bertrand Russell gave a lecture once, and this woman at the back of the hall got up in the question period, and she said to him, are you a solipsist? And he thought about it for a moment. He said, well, at the end of the day, probably I am a solipsist. And then she said, I am too. She said, isn't it a pity there aren't more of us? It's genuinely funny, right? So I think this, but now our challenge is to invent some jokes about philosophers which the non-philosophers will find funny, and this will then enhance our professionalism, okay? Via ridicule. That's the theory. In the end, people are afraid to say things. People become afraid to think things that they can't say. So we have to. My remedy is insensitivity training, and one of the exercises is to look at the great insensitivists and see how much they've accomplished toward realizing that if you take offense, it's your responsibility. If I lie to you, that's different. If I harm you, it's different. That's my harm. Is an unwilling injury inflicted. No one can even consent under most civilized laws. You cannot consent to be harmed. But, you can certainly consent to be deceived. We're all self-deceived. So we've all consented to that. And then we can be deceived by others, and Kant thinks we've consented, and therefore it doesn't have the same degree of moral culpability as lie. A lie is absolutely, forbidden, right? Verboten. But we can certainly deceive. We can certainly deceive one another. And we do. And the same, I would argue, the same analogy, this goes through the distinction between offense and harm, goes through in the same way, that we should not harm one another. There are lots of, principles. My favorite is John Stuart Mill's, the libertarian principle, that the only warrant the state has to constrain an individual is to prevent that person from harming someone else. Offense doesn't fall into that category. Because if I offer you an offense, if you know how to use your will, you can refuse it. You can't refuse a harm in the same way. And harms are not all personal. One could be struck by lightning. You can't refuse it. You can't say, I refuse to be struck by lightning. It's too late. But you can certainly refuse an offense. Von Karajan is my favorite example of this, because he was an egomaniac and completely insensitive, and therefore a reservoir of very funny stories. He was walking briskly down the street in Chicago one day, and as he had no time. When he got after a concert, he got into his car, and the chauffeur said, where do you want to go? He said, it doesn't matter, they need me everywhere. We could have a whole conference on this guy, okay? And he's walking briskly down the street, and then this other guy who doesn't see him, they collided on a street corner, and they recoiled from the force of the collision. And the guy who collided with Von Karajan looked at him and said, imbecile! And Von Karajan looked back, he took off his hat, he said, Von Karajan. Absolutely no offense. He refused to take offense. This is social judo, okay? This is called, I teach this in sensitivity workshops. It's called social judo. You reflect it back. The harder they try to offend you, the more it reflects back to them. It's perfect, perfect reflection. People who have a lot of money are not happier necessarily than people who don't have a lot of money. There's a sort of, disconnect statistically. There's no firm correlation between wealth and happiness. But they show that people who, if you're going to be unhappy, much better off if you have a little money than if you because meet again in Seoul, if not sooner, in 2012. Thank you very much.